Yo, we are back. Sorry about that. Alright, my mic's coming through and I've already tested the audio this time. I don't know what happened last time. The levels were showing that it was coming through to OBS, but I guess I didn't notice that there was no audio coming through until I looked at the chat, which was a bit too late because that was at the end of the video. Anyway, I'm just going to touch on really what I kind of covered in the video that I will probably be deleting from my channel shortly because there was no sound coming through from Bitwig. I was talking about the grid and also kind of expanding on what I talked about with LFO tool. The last thing that I did was basically built a basic 2-operator FM synth, and this was the patch that I created. It is being triggered underneath this break in these blue blocks here. I'm just going to go ahead and consolidate all of this into one. Alright, and this is what we've got. Okay, so I'll walk you through kind of how to build a patch like this from scratch. Let's just go ahead and delete everything from this channel except for the MIDI. So firstly, I want to expand on what I talked about with LFO tool. If I go to presets, load up my MSEG container, and on the instrument layer here, oh, it looks like I already saved it with a polygrid on, which I didn't mean to do. Just going to delete that out for a sec. Alright, there's nothing on there now. Okay, I'm just going to quickly oversave this. Okay. Alright, so what I want is for that to just open up with no instrument on. So we would just go ahead and open this chain and we'll add a polygrid. Now there are three types of grid. There's the note grid, the polygrid and the effects grid. They're all essentially the same thing. They all have all the same modules. I'm not sure if there might be some different options here in the main page for the device. Okay, so we've got it on monophonic mode because we're going to be making some bass patches, and I want it retriggering never because we're going to be doing some legato notes here, and that'll do for now. Alright, so let's start with an oscillator. The first synth that I built last time was a basic subtractive, so I'll just quickly run through that again. We're going to bring in a Sawtooth Oscillator. We're going to add an envelope. ADSR will do. The way this works, and this is essentially like having phase plant built right into the DAW. So if you don't have a modular sound design tool like phase plant, you don't really need one in Bitwig. You've got everything you need right here. Just going to open up the sustain, and I don't know, let's give it exactly 10 milliseconds of attack, and oops, 50 milliseconds of release or something. And we're not getting any sound at the moment, and that's because we don't have an audio out, so we need to give it an audio output, which will just connect to the end of the envelope. And yeah, let's just bring that down a fair bit. Sorry about that. There we go. We'll do -8. So yeah, we have our basic sawtooth wave there. Now, might double the pitch on these guys. You could do it either like that, or you could control click here and do 12 semitones up. And then I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate these two. Okay, and let's detune the saw waves against each other a fair bit. Something like that. And let's add a sub oscillator. So we could either add just a straight up sine wave, or we do have a sub oscillator here which we could throw in. We could say we want it to be an octave below. I think that's going to be an octave below these at their default pitch though. So What I'm going to do instead is just bring in a sine oscillator here. We'll duplicate the envelope. Just going to disconnect it from there, connect that together. You just drag and drop between the points, or you can just drag. If you drag something onto the point, it automatically connects. If we move this out a bit, we could put a mix module connected to the output, and then start lining all of these up, and they all get their own mixer channel. We bring all of the volumes down, and we'll add a noise generator as well. Just here, duplicate the envelope again, connect the noise to it, and then we'll have a fourth channel for noise. Bring the volume down. Over here I'm going to add a macro 4, and this is purely just to make it easier to modulate outside of the grid. So we have pre-chords on all of this stuff, so every time a gate signal is triggered, the envelope's going to trigger with this on. But we could add our own gate input here, and then alter the gate signal with various different, let's see, what have we got? You could put, you know, like a gate generator in there, or probability or something to kind of randomize the gate signals. But we're not going to use that. We're just going to leave the pre-chord on, which acts like this will trigger every time it receives a standard gate signal. This is the pitch pre-chord, which automatically maps it 100% to keyboard tracking. And I'm not getting any sound. What is that? Oh yeah, they're all down. So we'll just take these macros. The first one I'm going to drag up till we hit +1 exactly, and that is going to be 0 dB. Do the same with the second one. And you can, once you've selected one, you can go up here and that's 101. We can just go Control +1, Control +1. And then we'll do the same with these other two here. Just do a little bit on these guys. And then up here, we want Control +1 and +1. So now those are all going to, if we raise that up, it's going to go up to what's basically the 0 dB mark there. So we've got a volume control here. We can name these SAW 1, SAW 2, oops, sub, and noise. Dial in some basic levels. We probably only want a little bit of noise, maybe 20% tops. Fair bit of sub because we're working on a bass. Bring that up to about 90%, and we'll bring our two saw waves up to, I don't know, about 70-ish. See what we end up with when we hit a key. And you know, we could bring these back down and detune them from that point if we want a lower res. Alright, so we could go ahead and add our own distortion and stuff within the grid, which is not how I tend to use it when I'm building synth type instruments. I'll just build the oscillator and like a mixing bank, and then add all of my own third-party effects, and then you can still modulate them with all of these. I'll look at what I've learned about LFO Tool again quickly. I went over it in the last attempt, but it was only my voiceover coming out, so I don't know how well explained it was. I think it was mostly talking anyway, but it's quite a handy little tip. Anyway, that's basically how you would build a standard kind of subtractive synth. You could mess with if we put the note retrigger, this will make the oscillators restart with every gate signal. which makes every press sound pretty much the same. Now what we could do is put one of these envelopes here, and then we just have one master ADSR, and if we were to delete these, we get pretty much the same result. So it's really up to you where you put the envelope. You could give each oscillator its own envelope if you want, or you can just have them mixed into one master envelope, which is the more conventional way. Alright, so let's have a quick look at some of the tools that we have available for distortion, because I haven't really played with them all yet. Almost looks like a sine shaper or a wave folder of some kind, but we do have a wave folder here as well. We've got a standard distortion. What do we get out of this? Sounds kind of overdrivey, that one. Hard clipper. And you know, you could create custom workarounds to add mix controls and stuff to all of these. You would just have to do a bit of clever routing, but it's perfectly possible. Quantizer, I believe, is a bit like a bit crusher. Then we got the rectifier. I'm not sure what this one does. And the saturator. Which is similar, it's like a smaller version to the, looks like the built-in Bitwig saturation plugin. So you can change the curve. Yeah, I haven't honestly played with the native saturator too much in Bitwig. I just have quite a lot of distortion plugins as it is, so. Then the wave folder. So yeah, you've got quite a lot of tools in here. We've got filters that we could even add in here if you didn't want to use one outside of the synth. So we could put like a ladder filter here. Turn off key tracking. So yeah, quite a Moog type filter. But you know, I have better filter plugins, so I wouldn't necessarily use that. Again, I just tend to build my oscillator banks and a mixer. So if we wanted to then go ahead and add our own effects chain, we can nest them within the polygrid here. We could put our own distortion of our choosing in here. How about an analog black box HG2? Alright, something like that. We get a nice growl out of it, and then we'll stick a filter on the other side of that, of our choosing. I was messing with Filter Freak before. Too much drive there for sure. Okay, so if we wanted to modulate this, we could use the basic LFO, but I want to quickly show you this LFO tool trick. So if we just close out of this for a sec, I figured out the note retriggering and a more efficient way to do it. So if we go to this one note here, by default all of these notes are going to be on channel 1. If I just zoom out a bit, change that to 1 as well. So generally, if you wanted to note retrigger a tool like LFO tool, the more conventional way of doing that would be to have a separate MIDI channel with the notes put in there when you want it to retrigger. But say we wanted it to retrigger on this E note, all we actually need to do is set that one note in this MIDI block to MIDI channel 2. And then if we go back to our device here, say we wanted LFO 4, which just make into a fin. So we wanted that to modulate the filter. All we would do is, we've got LFO 4 here, and we'll modulate our filter cutoff. I don't think I need to open it again. Yeah, frequency upwards like that. Okay, it's not doing anything yet. Now the reason for that is because if we go into the LFO tool, it's on note retrigger, but there's nothing playing, so it's not moving. If I change this to envelope mode now and turn on the channel filter, which is the other step. So if you had the channel filter here, only let it feed through channel 2, turn that on. Just that first note, which is on MIDI channel 2, will trigger the LFO. So say we wanted this one to also trigger it, we would just change that to MIDI channel 2, but we could say, okay, actually we want this one to trigger it this time. So you can do some quite interesting stuff, like trigger it with different notes in the same kind of arrangement. And get some subtle variation that way. So yeah, we'll do that. And then let's go back into our instrument and change this into something a bit more interesting. So we'll go back and create an FM patch this time. So all we really need for this is we could take a phase oscillator here. This is one of the oscillators from Bitwig's Phase 4 phase modulation synth. And I'm just going to take a sine wave oscillator and feed it into its phase. And I'm going to colour this purple so that we know that it's a phase modulation, same colour as the input here. And we'll go ahead and take another one of those, feed it into this one's phase, and again make it purple so we know that it's a modulation oscillator. Now I'm just going to go ahead and up these 1 octave and 2 octaves, and then we can modulate this one using this one. Now it might be a bit weird because it looks like this is in like an inverted phase to this one. So let's see what we end up with. See, that's quite different to if we were to throw another sine oscillator on here. One of the cool things about this is if you want to change the oscillator, you just drag it over and it does all the connections for you. It's just good to go, basically. they're a little bit weird at the moment because they're not all triggering at the same time, but if we switch this pre-chord on them all, they'll all start in the same phase position. Okay, so we could do something like that, and then add a macro down here and assign this guy to this, and this one to a lesser extent, maybe up to, I think it was 30% I did last time. Call this FM amount, and then if we bring these all the way down, as we push up this macro, you'll see it modulating both of those at the amounts that we set at maximum. So the right one is going all the way up, and the middle one is just going up to about 30%. So then we could add a different LFO tool. I think this one's quite an interesting shape to this. See what we get. Just adjust the rate a little bit, make it a bit faster, like a half bar. And we want it in envelope mode. And then we could go back to our modulator and adjust the depth here. We could adjust the starting position of the phase somewhere here. Give it a bit more distortion maybe. Or something with a bit more grit than the black box. Let's try what we got. Let me just go for trash maybe. I haven't loaded up trash in a while. So yeah, you get the idea. But yeah, just using in front of the LFO tool, it's pretty much the same as I set it up last time. I've still got my note filter with the C0 default, and the reason for that is if we want it out of envelope mode, we just have to turn this on, and it'll stop the bank number from changing, because without that note filter there, if I turn it off, you'll see these change because they are supposed to be MIDI triggerable. And that's not what we want, because we want it to stay on one modulation curve. So C0 is the note that triggers bank 1 on MIDI channel 1. Now you could get really quite technical with this and trigger these by different MIDI notes, but you would either have to set this up to follow your arrangement based on the notes here, which would be extremely difficult, or you would have to what was the other thing I was thinking? yeah, well, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, yeah, keeping this from changing is definitely the way forward. And I think it's easier to just have a separate instance of LFO tool for each one, because then you know exactly which of these audio rate modulators you need to assign to use that shape. So I look at MSEG1 here. If I want to look at the shape of it, I see it's there. I press play. At the moment, because that's been moved back to there by the notes in the arrangement, if I turn on the note filter, you can see the little graph inside that MSEG1 following that pattern. So yeah, really cool, the grid. I think it's something that I'm not going to spend too much time on in tutorials. There are people out there like Polarity who do much more in-depth and complex stuff than I'm really willing to put the time into in here, but it's just nice to have, especially if unlike me, you were learning Bitwig and you don't have phase plant, because phase plant's really my go-to modular synthesis platform. But if I wanted to, I mean, I can still use the phase plant oscillators in here and then use other nested effects like we did here on within here. So, you know, we've added our own. You can even add note effects in here, which is pretty mental. But yeah, it's really, really clever having something like this built into the DAW that's modulatable with the DAW's own modulation devices, and you've really got a lot of different modules in here as well. Like, you got lots of different distortions, stuff for messing with the pitch. These are just your inputs and outputs. Quite a decent selection of oscillators, including sampler, wavetable, swarm, which is kind of granular, and then the phase one, which, you know, we could drop that in here instead. See what we get with some of these other waveforms. So yeah, we could even modulate this with some other modulation device. But yeah, you can really get quite technical with this thing. It really is quite good. I mean, I'll pull up the preset that I was using before. It came out a bit better than this time around. What was it? I called it Growl, something FM Growler. I think it was this guy. Oh right, I don't have the modulation set. Yeah, I should have saved it all as part of the same container really, but it's easy to make these FM growls, and I typically wouldn't do it in the grid. I would probably do it in phase plant anyway, because it's what I'm more comfortable using, and it's got a few extra tricks up its sleeve that are just easier to access without having to do all kinds of crazy, probably math and stuff like that in the grid. Phase plant's just much more optimized to get going quickly, so I use that. But yeah, the grid is a very powerful tool, and you can use it to create all kinds of crazy note generation tools, instruments, and effects. I think instruments and note generation tools are probably the only things I would typically use it for. I have a pretty decent selection of plug-in effects and plug-in synths, really. I don't really have any reason to have to use it for instruments, but it's just kind of fun to build one from scratch and experiment, dropping different oscillators in over the existing ones and seeing what happens. And that's what's kind of cool about it, is you can just drop something on top of something else and it just replaces it and reconnects the connections exactly as it was set up before. So yeah, that's sorry about the first video. The first video was a bit more in depth, but all you got was my voiceover. So yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, the grid is really quite fun to play with, and yeah, I just wanted to really reiterate over that LFO tool trick, because using the channel filter to just select MIDI channel 2, that's just genius. And I don't even know if in Cubase you can have multiple notes in a MIDI block on different MIDI channels. I don't think you can. I might be wrong. It might just be something I've never thought to do before. But having that capability here means you don't even have to add dummy MIDI channels just to trigger an LFO from. You can select whatever note in your arrangement you want to do it, and if there's no note there, you could draw one in at 0 velocity, and it's not going to trigger any sound, but it will trigger your LFO if it's on the right MIDI channel. So yeah, it's just another example of how this kind of modular flexibility opens so many doors to be creative, so many doors to speed up your workflow with little things like this that just aren't available in Cubase, really. Like setting up LFO tool as a modulation source in Cubase was just so convoluted that I hardly ever did it. I had loads of people, thank me on my channel and stuff for putting that video up, but honestly, a lot of them probably used that method more than I ever did. I worked it out, realised how cumbersome it was, thought, oh, I'll do a video on it. I might even need to watch it myself at some point. And to be honest, I have had to watch it myself in the past when I was still in Cubase and decided I wanted to use LFO tool on something, and I started trying to set it up, and I'd miss a step. And generally that step was adding the MIDI loopback driver as the input in the generic remote in Cubase. That was that was the step I generally forget and be like, oh God, what have I missed? I'm gonna have to watch through my video again now. And yeah, I must have watched that video through a few times just because I've had to remind myself how to do a process that I did a video tutorial on in the first place. So yeah, not the most intuitive if you have to watch your own YouTube video to learn something. Whereas this is just so much more streamlined, this kind of workflow. I'm loving it. Still got a couple more things I need to wrap my head around and get my workflow speed up to par on. Once I've got those couple last bits checked off the list, just getting all of the modulation options really was all sorted out was the main thing for me. I was like, okay, I was really disappointed that Bitwig didn't have its own multi-stage envelope generator. So I was like, okay, I've got LFO tool, how can I make it work for me? And a bit of reading up taught me about that DC offset trick. I think the first method I saw was somebody feeding through some other kind of audio signal. It was quite an old video though, so I think it might have been before the DC offset tool was ever added to Bitwig. But yeah, that DC offset trick is just genius. And then being able to note retrigger it from notes in your existing arrangement is also amazing. Just not having to clutter up your project with MIDI tracks that you're like, oh, what's that one? Oh, okay, it's just a MIDI trigger, You can hide them, but then you have to unhide them if you want to edit them. If you just know that the modulator is active on the channel that it's triggering, you know that any notes that are in here. Obviously, if this was a really complicated piano arpeggio or something, and you only wanted to trigger it from a few random notes or something, it would be a real pain in the ass going through every single one of the dozens of notes in your MIDI clip, trying to find the ones that you use to trigger the LFO and change them if you want to change anything. But generally, when I'm using some automation shaper like LFO tool, I'm using it on a bass. I'm using it on a bass that I want to really modulate and make growl. And for that use case, this is just perfect. You just set it to your first note, to the MIDI channel 2, job done. Forget about it. Don't have to worry about any other MIDI channels triggering it or anything. So I absolutely love that. And yeah, it's just little examples like this that I just keep figuring out. And it all started with me reading up of some forum posts or Reddit posts on using LFO tool in here. And nobody was particularly clear, and I haven't really seen any videos being particularly clear about these little workarounds that you can do. I did see people mentioning that there were ways to trigger it using velocity or note. What I didn't realise what they meant by note was, well, by note I think they were using the same old method I was with the note filter, where if we wanted it on retrigger mode and we used the note filter, we would go to that LFO and change that to say E0, and that would only trigger on E0 notes, but it will trigger on every E0 note. You can then dial it in further with velocity, and on an instrument like this where it's not velocity sensitive, we could say we only want it to trigger on E0 on maximum velocity notes and just turn that first one up. It's not going to affect the sound of the synth because it's set to not be velocity sensitive. So the LFO is only going to respond to this E0 and not all the others. So you can do it that way, but for me it's just so much easier if I reset this back to whatever it was. It doesn't really matter. So much easier to just change that. Just change that to that, and you can go through. I'm not sure what the control is to move to the next clip in line. There must be one to do it with your keyboard, because that's another thing that's nice. In Cubase, moving left and right on a MIDI clip doesn't move it left and right. It selects the next one in line, which is what I'm actually trying to do in this particular case. But yeah, there must be like an Alt or Shift shortcut or something that I just don't know yet. But anyway, yeah, that's a little bit of an expansion on LFO tool, how to more efficiently MIDI trigger it using specific MIDI channel on specific notes. And again, I don't know if this is something unique to Bitwig, where you can have different notes in one clip on different MIDI channels. I know I've never seen that in Cubase, but it may be there and I just never had any reason to use it. It would actually be really handy for things like this, using LFO tool without having to clutter up your track with a bunch of extra MIDI tracks. But you do in Cubase still always have to add a MIDI track just to route LFO tool to a plugin for every single modulation routing that you use. So to do something as basic as what we did here, if you wanted to do it with modulation instead of automation in Cubase, you'd already be looking at 3 MIDI tracks added just for the sake of routing an LFO to a parameter. So it's not practical, and that's why I am learning Bitwig, to be in a nutshell. And at the moment it's just all about digging in until I feel comfortable enough that I feel like I could start a tune without hitting any brick walls where I'm like, okay, how do I do that? Ah, crap, I don't know how to do that. I'm going to have to completely kill the vibe of what I'm working on to research it, and that's just not what I want. I would rather get everything figured out and under my belt and work on absolutely no music whatsoever for a few months, just to know that the first time I write a tune I'm not going to run into any hurdles. And so far I'm pretty close. There's sidechaining is really the main one. I haven't really... In some cases it's pretty easy, especially if you're using a third-party plugin. So say if we had a synth in this chain, I've deleted it now, but if we added Pro C2, this third-party plugin, you would just turn on the sidechain input here, and then you could select, say this was a kick drum. We could select that as our input. Where it does get kind of cool is if this was a kick drum, after this tool, if we put, say, EQ and a compressor and a limiter, we can then, for our sidechain signal on this one, we can go to break. Any point in that chain we can select as our sidechain input. So we could say, okay, we want the master volume before it hits any of the plugins. We would select the tool out. because this is kind of just like a gain. I've set up like a basic leveler. And then, or we could say, okay, we want the output of the EQ to be our sidechain before it gets compressed and limited. So it's absolutely great routing flexibility as well for sidechaining. So yeah, with third-party plugins, it's really easy. With some of the native ones, or third-party plugins that support sidechain, some of the native ones, like the native compressor, and I was scratching my head for a while with this, because what I didn't realise at first was in here we've got two dynamics plugins. We've got the compressor and then we've got dynamics. And dynamics has its own sidechain input right down here. Compressor doesn't. Now I don't know if you can add an audio sidechain here to any device, even if it isn't sidechain compatible, and still trigger something in it by a sidechain source. Not sure how this works exactly. I feel like it's an envelope of some kind. I mean, we've got like this rise and fall. Yeah, I'll have to play with this. I'm not really sure. This would be if we wanted to send this audio track through. So let's send that from the break. Let's do tool out. So that's just sending the audio sidechain in. So then we would have to use this to probably modulate the... See, that's the thing, like what would you really modulate in this compressor? If you modulated the level, you're basically doing the job of the compressor for it, aren't you? So again, I don't think that's generally the use for these things, for adding a sidechain input to a compressor that doesn't have one, because you've still got to assign it to something. You could assign it to the amount, I guess, if it has an amount knob anywhere. I don't think it does. It only has the threshold. I mean, you could assign it to that, I suppose. But yeah, I would just always use this if I wanted to use sidechaining in the native stuff. But I generally don't really use native dynamics plugins anyway. In Cubase, I would use the native compressor just for sidechaining because it was the easiest way. But and it was quite a decent compressor for sidechaining. But I would probably just use Pro C2 in here. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. Just wanted to get this stream redone because I had a bit of an amateur hour moment and my audio wasn't being captured. So yeah, that is a very quick overview of the grid, specific to building instruments, and just a reiteration on what we talked about before with LFO tool and how to streamline the MIDI triggering. You can if you don't want it MIDI triggered, you're probably going to want your note filter on C0 just to stop those graphs from changing. So that's why I have both of them and just have them switched off and use whichever one I need. So the note filter is good for if you have LFO tool in this mode where you don't have note retrigger or envelope mode on. If you want note retrigger or envelope mode on, your most streamlined workflow is to turn the channel filter on to filter to level to MIDI channel 2, put it in envelope mode, and change whichever note in your arrangement you want to trigger it. In this case, E0 to channel 2. And if we wanted this one to trigger it as well, we would just change that one to channel 2. And if we hit play, you'll see it re-trigger again on the on bar 3. And because it's in envelope mode, it's only going to trigger once. If it's in note retrigger mode, I think it will keep looping until it hits another retrigger. That one actually retriggered again. Okay, that's because, yeah, we already set that one to channel 2 earlier to try and to demonstrate triggering it in different places. So yeah, that MIDI channel filter makes this method much more functional and much easier to customize. You don't have to always be looking at what exact note in what exact octave you need to send through. You can just change whichever note it's more about the position, really, isn't it? So you can say, okay, I want it to retrigger here and I want it to retrigger here. Select both of those notes, change them to MIDI channel 2. Job done. Anyway, good night, guys. We'll be back tomorrow. Talk about, let me see, trying to think what we haven't really covered that I'm already aware of that's quite cool. I think I've kind of gone over most of it, which really the coolest thing about Bitwig is its modulation system. And honestly, I'm hoping and praying that they add a really cool multi-stage envelope generator to Bitwig at some point soon, so I don't have to keep using LFO tool. But for now, it's functional. It does what I need, and you know, I had the tool already at my disposal. It's not like I had to buy it because Bitwig didn't have one. So I'd already bought it to use for this in Cubase, and then kind of realised how much of a pain in the arse it was, and never really used it for that, and just used it as a basic volume ducker for kind of fake sidechain ducking. So yeah, I'm really happy that I've actually, I get my money's worth out of Bitwig, and I'm now also getting my money's worth out of LFO tool. It's much more useful in my toolbox now than it ever was in Cubase. All right, good night, guys. I'm going to wrap it up there. It's getting close to midnight, and I've got work in the morning. So I hope this was informative. I hope you enjoyed the stream. Sorry about the longer version, which was a bit more fleshed out, not having any audio. But I'll delete that version. Just leave this one up, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.